Dr. Cohen, let's start with the basics. Could you,
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about yourself and sort of your path into medicine?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Chad. Number one, I want to thank you for doing this great podcast. You're a very creative and talented guy.
I appreciate
and
that.
I'm so much looking forward to these series. Really want to just bring people into the world of medicine, in the world of neurosurgery, what it takes to sort of go to the next level in terms of improving your health, and at the same time, some of the lessons I've learned as a neurosurgeon in my career, interacting with many patients who have so much inspired me, and so many others who have given me great lessons, and also some of the mistakes I've made that I like myself and all of us together can learn from. So starting from basics, how did I end up in neurosurgery? I came to this country as a refugee about 40 years ago, and I always wanted to do something special to give back to this great country what it gave me when I really needed it, when I came to this country as a very poor immigrant. Yeah. Working very hard, trying to really prove myself and to this country and everyone that I'm worth it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So when I came here about 40 years ago, I wanted to do something in medicine to help people. But there are many professions you can help people. It's not just medicine. And so the other thing, I was very interested in something artistic with my hands. And as I went to medical school and I was very interested in learning more and art of medicine, I found that cardiac surgery and brain surgery were two that really your hands were especially important in healing people.
Absolutely.
And eventually being in neurosurgery and going to the operating room and learning the incredible talent needed to be able to use your hands to give life, to relieve suffering. Those were really incredible moments. I saw the surgeon in the operating room and showing their art. And so I fell in love in neurosurgery, not because it was medicine, but because it was artwork.
Absolutely.
Because I had really this passion for technical excellence and bring everything to a new level to impact people's lives in an unprecedented fashion. And I think it's been a privilege.
Absolutely.
It's truly not a right, but a privilege to be able to be in this position. And it's been a God's blessing. Really, I think God's faith, my hard work, God, family, country, and really what this country has given me have been all important elements that I'm forever blessed and appreciated for.
Absolutely. So what was the moment when you were a medical student where you kind of had that aha, this is it, like I am ready to do this as my life's calling? What was that moment for you?
I remember I was interested in either heart surgery or brain surgery, and I went to both operations when I was rotating in these services as a medical student, and I just felt the brain is truly the seat of the soul, the crown jewel of creation. And so much we don't know about it, and there's so much potential to improve. And be able to work under the microscope, such delicate, operations, was really something that inspired me to go into it. And I had mentors who really supported me in neurosurgery to do that.
That's wonderful. It's so lucky. So speaking of that,
Yes.
and mentorship and then institutions that you've been so privileged to be a part of and had such a big
Yes.
impact on. You've come back to the University of Southern California to
Yes.
kind of give back. So, what was that kind of spark? What sort of brought that conversation to fruition?
Yeah, I started in UC San Diego in college. I went to USC for medical school. I'm a Trojan. And then I went to Mayo Clinic, did my residency in neurosurgery, and did a couple of fellowships at Yale University and University of Arkansas, and then practiced in Indiana University for about 18 years. I'm indebted to Indiana University and the Hoosiers and the people of Indiana. It was truly an honor to care for them, the trust they had in me. I was able to perform over 7,500 complex brain operations, which is unprecedented and really one of the largest in the world ever for a still practicing neurosurgeon. And after those, because most of my family are in Southern California,
That makes sense.
as I saw my family getting, extended family getting older, coming home, having the kids go to, their religious school and be able to keep the tradition. Again, God, family, country theme was important. So it was an honor to come back to USC, a Keck School of Medicine, and be able to finish the career there.
Absolutely. Kind of talking about tracking through your history and, where you have these like pivotal moments that were,
Yes.
so important for you. When did you feel like, you had sort of, maybe early career kind of completed that transformation and like today is the day I became a neurosurgeon?
Yeah, that's a very good question. When do you really feel like you're home? When do you see, I'm really it? I got where I want to be after, God knows, 15 years of training, which is really incredibly taxing. Everyone comes to that moment at a different time in their lives. When do you have that confidence in the operating room that you can do this alone and you don't need anyone to be around? I think I took a very proactive effort during residency to learn every time I could and build a sense of safe confidence. I think there's two types of confidence. You're confident you can hurt people, but you're confident knowing that you can get yourself out of trouble in the operating room anytime you can. And I think that was during my chief residency last year at Mayo Clinic. There were just maybe the second half was when I really felt like I got home. And I'm home, I feel confident, I'm comfortable doing cases that may have not seen or done before, but because I'm sticking with the principles of surgery and I know how to get myself out of trouble, I can keep the patient safe.
No, absolutely. And so to have those moments where you're in those high stakes situations and you're, applying, ground truth and first principles of your training, what's your, in terms of your day to day, before you're going into the operating room, like what gets you, sort of in the zone, and ready for that?
That's a very good question, because what it gets you in flow, I sometimes say. Athletes get in flow.
Yeah.
And the concept of flow that Mihaly has defined, and I, advise people read his book, it's incredible, is athletes get into this total absorption in the task. And they don't know the sense of time anymore. You could be playing basketball like Michael Jordan, or you could be swimming like Michael Phelps for hours, but you have no sense of time. So what does it take to get in flow? And I think it is easy to know it when you see it, but it's very difficult to define it. That total absorption in the task, Chad, I think it comes with a passion you have to be the best at what you do, without a question, to push yourself as farther as anyone has. There is no limit into your effort you're going to put in your work, which I have always believed in. And there's also a sense of challenge, skill balance. You have to do things that challenge you at all times for you to stay in zone. And so I always do surgeries that are more and more challenging. I tackle cases that I push the boundaries to benefit the patient at any cost. And by making the case more challenging at the benefit of the patient, and by really the passion to do whatever it takes to do better than anybody has ever thought about, I think those are elements that put me in flow to be where I am today.
Absolutely, yeah. That's something I've heard you say before. Is it's not just about being the best that you can do. It's about pushing yourself to that edge and being the best that anybody could do.
Exactly.
And it's amazing to see the kind of growth that people can have within themselves when you no longer accept that arbitrarily personal blocking down, and instead you constantly push the ceiling up, and the growth that you experience as a person and as a clinician is really something.
Right. I like what you said. It's doing the best anyone can, but not do the best you can. When patients come to me and say, Dr. Cohen, can you do the best you can? Right before surgery, I say, don't ask me. Don't expect me to do the best I can. And they all get surprised and, get almost for a second scared.
Yeah.
I tell them, you should only demand that I do the best anyone can, because that's what you deserve. That's what every patient deserves. And you should never put your limits into what's your competitor and how amazing they are and to get there. You always have to put the threshold of success way beyond that. And every moment thrive for it. Thriving for excellence. I think it's so incredibly important. I think somebody said, one of the basketball coaches, I forget his name, he said, if we thrive for perfection, we achieve excellence. And I think that is so important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, and it's, yeah. And when, it's the times I've, had the privilege of being in the operating room with you, and seeing, how you do that with a team, like you can feel, the energy changes where everybody's like, okay, we're giving 100% before he walked in, we're all doing 120%. And it's just to see that flow state, all of that is really, it's one of those rare moments of human achievement and collaboration that is, it truly is art. It's like, you're the the maestro with the orchestra, and to, hear everybody be so in tune and see everything just, perfect flow is really something. And that was something I kind of want to ask you about is, we talk about collaboration in medicine being so vital. Can you talk a little bit about the role that, working with other professionals sort of plays in your practice? Because we have very complicated patients that we see. They come from other specialists, sometimes other surgeons to get another opinion. So how would you say that you kind of approach the philosophy, what's your philosophy of collaboration with other specialists?
It's a team sport. It's always been. Maybe previously surgery wasn't considered as much, but currently it is for success. For one person to be really in a team approach, it comes to respecting everybody's opinion, no matter what they are. Making everybody feel like they have a value for the team and inspiring them. Leadership is about inspiring others to achieve their excellence. Yeah. And how it's a tough art. It's easier said than done. How can I inspire everyone in the room with many different personalities to achieve their full potential? And when you ask them to do something, they don't feel like they're being ordered, but in fact they're working for a common goal. And I think it all comes down to defining a very clear goal, which is the best outcome for the patient, and then defining individual roles, defining individual goals and metrics, and respectfully treating everyone to achieve those metrics in an objective manner. And I've always said people never forget people may forget what you tell them, but they never forget how you make them feel.
100%.
And so you really want to keep that in mind, the emotional intelligence, the fact that everybody has their own stressors, everybody has their own things at home. And when they come to work, they want to feel good about what they do.
Absolutely.
And don't feel like they're just, a small wheel in the factory.
Yeah. No, and especially, touching on like those emotional things that people, despite doing their best to leave them at the door, that they bring with them, how do you, because again, we talk about it as a team sport, we have all of these, moving parts, certainly. But sometimes, even when the team has, practiced as best they can, everybody's doing the absolute best that anyone can, sometimes the outcome isn't necessarily what we hope for. And, I think a lot of time, folks who don't work in medicine don't really understand the toll it takes on us. People see us as, they think we're just these, smart, technically savvy robots that don't go through these things ourselves, but we all have face these challenges. It's part of the human condition, especially with, as sort of heavy of a area that we work in. How do you handle those emotional challenges with tough cases?
Yeah. So, we take risks.
Yeah.
If we don't take risks on people's lives, we're not going to save a portion of those patients' lives. If you always do everything extremely in a very conservative manner and don't push the boundaries, there are going to be a group of patients who are going to miss an opportunity to have a chance at better life. How do you balance that risk of pushing the boundaries, improving lives, versus placing some of them at risk?
Yeah.
And that's something that defines, in my opinion, the success of many neurosurgeons and many people in business.
Yeah.
And it's a very fine line. It really depends on how much risk you want to take, what are your resources, what are your other abilities to control risk if anything goes wrong. Yeah. In my life, I've been blessed to push the limits, and at majority of the time, I've been very lucky. I have to say that. Part of it comes in faith. I always say the operating room is a temple, is a church, is a mosque. We really are accountable in front of God. And can you do everything and go home and look into your children's eyes and say, I did everything for the patient during the day if I had looked into the children's eyes of that patient.
Yeah.
If you do that and say yes, you have done your duty.
Yeah.
Anything otherwise, you need to do a lot of soul searching.
You know what you're saying about the temple of
Yes.
know where we work. It's the accountability is so
Yes.
so key. Especially in we're just in an ever evolving field.
Correct.
And in order to make sure that we're doing the very best that anyone can for these patients, what would you say are some of your strategies for staying at the absolute top of the game?
Yeah. How do you stay on top of the game? That's the challenge. Many of my colleagues, neurosurgeons, who started doing brain surgery, and within 5 years of training, they burned out and left. They went to spine surgery, or they ended up doing other things. It is a very stiff and tough marathon. That mental fitness to be able to deal with your failures. Nobody can say, I have no failures in brain surgery or in anything, especially in brain surgery where stakes are so high. It takes such a huge toll. So many people dropped out. So how did some stayed in and became the gladiators? I sometimes call myself and some of my colleagues, maybe not as humbly as I should be, gladiators, because we really are the knights, the gladiators that carry the message for the next generation by pushing the boundaries, teaching the next generation what to do. And I think that comes with really your commitment and your passion, that you learn from your failures and you move on, but you never forget. Every face of every patient that despite all my candid efforts, I could not deliver to his or her family, unfortunately. I remember, and I learned a huge lesson to do better next time. However, I didn't let it make me quit and not be able to have a chance at the next patient to improve their lives or serve their lives. And that really sense toughness that you need to have. I'll call safe confidence. You have to be confident but safe, to know your limits but push the limits safely. That's a tough line. It's a tough line.
Absolutely. And a lot of times if we're talking about
Yes.
Gladiators and crusaders and people who believe
Yes.
that they have sort of a holy mission regardless of what your belief system is, when you have that within you, there's always a central text in any context. And you have produced in this arena what many consider the not to be sacrilegious, but the Bible of modern neurosurgery, the Neurosurgical Atlas. At what point in your career did you go, I can create this amazing resource that other neurosurgeons, the folks behind me, people ahead of me, everybody can use. What was the kind of the process like for you going, this is what I'm going to do?
Yeah, Neurosurgical Atlas is a non-profit organization. We have a very large website for neurosurgical education. It's been extremely popular. We've been blessed for that all over the world. Many surgical videos of neurosurgical techniques. Why did I do that? Why did I spend, more than a decade of my life doing that? Is because I saw there was no line of clear communication between surgeons to talk about techniques. We never has videos of surgeries. It was all textbooks. It's very difficult to learn surgery from textbooks. Most residents learn from one institution and then go to practice. They never have a chance to learn from others. And so we wanted to create a collection that all these surgical videos are curated so you can really see technique in real time. And every patient becomes a document to learn from for the next patient. And to create that collection of an immense surgical videos and really, I call it very secretive pearls of technique that really have not been passed along in the history of neurosurgery, and be able to preserve that is crucial. And that's how Neurosurgical Atlas was created.
And speaking of that, like you were just talking about, young, for folks listening that don't, know kind of some of the jargon, we may use some terms and we'll try to do our best to explain them. When somebody's a young attending, meaning a new physician who's in charge of, a panel of patients who's completed their training, For you, Dr. Cohen, for a young attending neurosurgeon, what if you had one piece of advice that you wish somebody would have given you when you were starting out as a new attending? What would it have been?
I would find my first job at a place where you have great opportunity to practice safely, with great volume of cases and great mentorship. I wouldn't put money or location as the first thing. I would put the environment for you to learn, because I learned today. We're always going to be learning, especially when you finish your residency. That's a peak of your time to learn more on your own and from others, when you have that freedom and you're no longer a learner. We're always a learner, but not an official learner in a residency program. So I think choosing a place to work where you have a great opportunity to help grateful patients and to build your confidence, and then have mentorship from your colleagues, I think those are critical. And it's most critical for you to become a great surgeon. There are many great talented people that never become a great surgeon or an athlete or a businessman because they were never placed in the right environment.
Absolutely, yeah. And environment is so crucial, especially,
Yes.
With something that it's a cultural trope, neurosurgery, don't turn it into brain surgery. People see this field as something being, synonymous with just being incredibly difficult. And,
Yes.
But as a field, it's still, sort of, correct me if I'm wrong, amongst the youngest of the medical specialties overall. And I know you're a very strong historian on the specialty itself. When it kind of give our listeners an idea of like when did it emerge as a distinct specialty, and who were kind of the pioneers for shaping that.
Right. I think neurosurgery is in its infancy right now. Still is. There's so much to learn. We do sometimes use crude instruments to open the skull and do surgery. We're always evolving. But there's no doubt we don't know much about the human brain still. There's so much that we need to learn. And so I think this is the time when we're using very basic principles to cure people and touch their soul. And it's even more challenging to be able to do the right thing. But I think with time, we're going to see immense evolution of skills, techniques, and understanding of human brain and how it works that will revolution of the care of many patients.
We talk about, like we did just a moment ago about, the temple that the OR is, and so much of, how much of what we do affects not just the physical, our day to day, but, there's sort of a metaphysical component too, where we talk about the human experience and how neurosurgery, kind of aims to preserve that. How would you say, neurosurgery, working in the field has shaped the way you view, a person's sense of identity and human consciousness?
Yeah. The patients have been an inspiration to me, and really seeing them go through such difficult times and learning how humanity deals with difficulty. Imagine, a young, newly married man or newly dad, or a new dad who just found out they have a brain tumor and they have less than a year to live.
Oof, yeah, those cases are tough.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Chad, just imagining what they're going through. And this is a journey that we go through with the patient. And many times I place myself in their own position.
Yeah.
And my niece passed away from a very difficult brain tumor at age 12. And that was a transformative experience to really put yourself in the position of these really inspiring patients.
Yeah. No,
that's an element of it that's separate from the surgery and what you learn from the human mind in terms of operating on the brain and how the brain works. What are the structures that fit together and the segments of the brain that work together to make us who we are? And it's extremely intriguing. But going back to something that's even much more realistic to think about is that human experience of going through extremely difficult times. What does it take to go through that? How do you cope with difficult times and crisis? How do you survive? And how do you remain grateful? How do you use your support systems? And when you have only less than a year to live, the reaction these patients have in terms of the time spent with their family is really an inspiring and a very good lesson for all of us.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that again, it's something that comes up so often, as a central theme in our field is
Yes.
the tenacity of the human spirit, and obviously, the story of Rachel, your niece, has
Yes.
had a profound impact on all of us that have had the privilege of working with you.
Thank you.
And absolutely.
Before we go to the same question, I have to also mention most brain tumors are benign.
Right.
So
Right.
when we talk about these tough times, these are a subsegment of the population. So when a patient is diagnosed with a tumor, most often they have a benign brain tumor. And if they have a very skilled neurosurgeon whose specialty is brain tumors and really have dedicated their career to that, you'll see that with good expertise, these tumors often can be cured or nearly cured. And these patients can have a very productive life ahead of themselves.
And to that end, Dr. Cohen,
Yes.
obviously the Neurosurgical Atlas is a
Yes.
great resource for clinicians and folks that work in the field. But do you have a good resource for patients and their families that you would recommend in terms of learning what the different kinds of neurosurgeons there are?
Yes.
Different tumor types and disease processes. What resource would you recommend for that?
Yeah. Actually, we created a website that's, if they Google, my name comes up, and it provides really detailed information about every brain tumor.
Okay.
And we really collected a lot of real world data. Often the patients go to Dr. Google and they want to find data that way. These information can be extremely confusing, can be distracting, at times can really lead to the patient to feel very desperate, in fact, more desperate. Because when you don't have good information and you just get a very scattered set of data, you become more nervous, you become more unsure. And to really bring the patient a power of good information, and information is power, we created a website, and you're welcome to go to Cohen-Gadol.com, where every tumor type in the brain has been very clearly defined, all the diagnosis, symptoms, treatment, surgery, from a very research verified perspective described. So the patients can really learn in a very concise manner rather than dealing with a lot of technical information that could be a lot more confusing and put more fear in their heart. And the moment you have fear in your heart, you make poor decisions, and that can lead to more challenges later.
Absolutely. No, that's perfect. So for the folks listening to this, at home,
Yes.
on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, that's www.aaron, AARON-COHEN-GADOL, Cohen-Gadol.com for more information on benign brain tumors, aneurysms, spine tumors, all kinds of information, anything that touches the brain or spine. It's a great resource, and we recommend you check it out if you have questions.
Thank you. And it really is very broad. Remember, when we talk about brain tumors, there are vascular malformations, arteriovenous malformations, cavernous malformations, meningiomas, gliomas, pituitary adenomas, chordomas, chondrosarcomas, really a very wide range of lesions that the patient face. But the critical aspect in all of this is going to a surgeon who has a lot of experience. I know often the patients choose a hospital. Oh, this is a top 3 hospital in the country, so that means I'm going to good care. I'm going to
Right.
get a good care.
Right.
Nobody can guarantee that because the hospital doesn't operate on you.
Right.
It's the surgeon. So you have to choose your surgeon, not your hospital. And that's a big error people make. They assume if I'm going to a hospital, if I'm going to this good hotel, for example, I'm going to get a good service. It doesn't always work that way. So you have to choose your surgeon rather than your hospital. There are some incredible surgeons in mid-level hospitals that are much, much better than those that are in the top hospitals. So you got to do research on your surgeon. You got to really ask around and make good decisions based on who is taking care of you.
Absolutely. Yeah. So and this is something I've heard you say before,
Yes.
But again, for our listeners, if you had to, make a obviously a very well-educated guess, but a guess for, somebody that's been, working in the field as long as you have normally, About how many cases have they done?
Yeah. Unfortunately, many neurosurgeons mostly do spine surgery.
Yeah.
So when you go to see your neurosurgeon, you're likely to see someone that's primarily their work is focused on spine, which is great. I mean, we need great spine surgeons, and most of the work on neurosurgery is spine. However, if you have a complex brain tumor, if you have a brain tumor that you really want to get somebody with that specialty, you got to do your research.
Yeah.
You got to find out what is their fellowship of the surgeon, how many years of experience they have within their area. Are they focused in treating those tumors in your area, or are they just a general neurosurgeon and it's not just, or they treat a wide variety of simple cases?
Yeah.
And so I think it's really critical to get to know and see how many brain tumors your surgeon does a year. He or she, I think, at least should do about 100 cases a year just to remain competent.
Gotcha.
And if the tumor is very complex, you really need to go to a place where there are very few people in every state that do those kind of tumors and have extensive experience. Just because you're going to a very well-known hospital does not mean by any chance you're getting the best surgeon. Currently, in 2025, almost the top 50% of any hospital in this nation has every technology you want, and there is no advantage of one hospital over the other.
Right.
It used to be that the top hospitals had special technologies that nobody else has.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the patients still think that way, but that's not correct.
Yeah.
The top 50% hospitals in this country have exactly the same technology for your surgery. It all comes down to who's doing the operation in the operating room.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the tools. It's the hands operating those tools. I mean,
say a fool with a tool, still a fool.
Right. No, that's 100% true. So a competent, specialist neurosurgeon who can do complex cases at the same length of time that you've been doing this, around 2000 or so.
Right.
And did I read correctly? It was you've done about
7,500.
75. Wow.
That's a very, it's probably not going to happen again. That was a very unusual situation where I was in Indiana early in my career and practiced in a very centralized system where all the patients came to the same place. And it was a very, very unique and it was a huge blessing to be able to take care of those great patients. But yes, the 7,500 number probably is going to be difficult to reach because now the health system in the United States is so spread out.
Right.
So it's very difficult for an individual surgeon to be able to build that much of experience.
Yeah. Wow. But
Thank you.
Those numbers are still, very, very impressive, Dr. Cohen. It's, and that's, again, why you've become one of the recognized leaders in the field. For anybody that's listening that's scientifically minded, we know that more and better data gives us a much better perspective and is able to allow people to make much better informed choices.
Right.
And so, your data set is very robust and very unique.
The cases are one thing, Chad, as you mentioned. The more cases you do, the better. But there's also another element that are you going to really commit yourself and dedicate yourself to be the best at what you do?
Right. Like we talked about earlier, it's being the best that anyone can.
Right. To be the best that anyone can. You really have to put everything to the side. You have to put, sometimes time with a family to the side. You have to put, financial returns to the side. You have to put sometimes your own life to the side. And you really have to focus on doing this as an art. And that requires an extremely unusual commitment to be able to go there, to really sit, to be critical of yourself and ask others to be critical of you, especially at the beginning. And that's hard to do as a neurosurgeon because when you become a neurosurgeon, you believe that you're always right because you're doing such an extremely important task and you're saving lives and you're touching lives and every error can have a huge and the ultimate price. So for you to feel vulnerable at the same time, but have the confidence of being able to do whatever it takes beyond humanly possible is a very fine line, and very few people can walk it. I mean, many of my dear friends quit doing brain surgery very early on in their career and then dedicated themselves to spine because it's really a work of a gladiator. You really have to be there and fight for the art and fight for really proving yourself every day to everyone that this is the right path forward. And to fight for that, and at the same time to feel vulnerable and to balance the two together and face your disappointments, it's an extremely tough task. I would say it requires a very special personality and temperament.
Yeah.
I always say one of the important ingredients for a great athlete or a neurosurgeon is that temperament. Can you deal with failure but push forward as strong as as if you never had a failure? How can you learn just enough without being, disillusioned and disappointed, which can happen very often? So I think those are some of the critical aspects of, life in general, rather than neurosurgery or anyone who wants to become the best at what they do.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and that's, and thank you for sharing that perspective, because again, it's so often we think of neurosurgeons as these 120-hour week superhumans who, like we talked about earlier, everybody, especially in the last few years, there was sort of a narrative out there where, we're all heroes and we're expected to kind of put ourselves on the altar a little bit.
Yes.
And doing the best for our patients is part of that. And we certainly, wouldn't be doing this work if we didn't want to do that.
Correct.
But it is, I think, for everyone, very important to keep in mind that, it takes a special person to work in this environment, but like we are still human and we share that human experience with our patients. And I think that's just something that we just don't hear enough about generally. But, kind of circling back to, your robust, training data set,
Thanks.
We're starting to see questions about the future of work generally. Artificial intelligence is transforming medicine and it's transforming every part of society and work at an unprecedented rate. Your own Atlas GPT is becoming an essential tool for, clinical neuroscience trainees, neurosurgery residents, attending surgeons with experience, have been using it to glean really useful insights. Where do you kind of see it going, in the next decade? When we're talking, it's the new year, we're talking about 2025. Where do you see medicine as it relates to AI in 2035?
Yeah, that's a good question. Before we go to that question, I want to finish off the last one, Chad. And in general, not just as a neurosurgeon or an athlete, how do you be able to deal with your failures?
Yeah.
Remember, there are some neurosurgeons or athletes that are very conservative. They don't take risks.
Yeah.
But they don't achieve their full potential. They don't help as many patients because for those really very high-risk cases, the top 20% that are very risky, the surgeon has to take some risk to help a portion of those patients. If you don't, then all those 20% are sort of left behind.
Yeah.
And to take that extra risk to help those and the failures, you have to deal with those. And always, looking back saying, well, maybe if I had done this differently, that patient would have not suffered and would have not been paralyzed or would have had a much better quality of life with their family. And how do you look in the eyes of the children and the wife of that family when you operate on the husband? How could I have done different? How could I do it differently next time? And still maintain your bold, confident behavior to be able to make that extra effort for those patients who don't have a perfect chance? Or how do you balance removing more tumor versus placing the brain at risk, which is very adherent to the tumor? Those are the big questions that really differentiate those knights or gladiators from the rest of the neurosurgeons. And how, when you fall in your life, get up and move forward.
Yeah.
When you fall, it's that moment of loss and extremely sort of doubting yourself. And then you have to get up and move as hard as you can very quickly. That's really, I think, the essence of success in any human being. I don't think you can look at any extremely successful people, either in business like Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, or even in neurosurgery, and see that they didn't have failures. They definitely had failures. And how they dealt with a failure differentiated them to be where they are today. If it was a smooth sailing, anybody would look like a great captain.
Right.
It is that captain who really can bring the ship home in extremely turbulent waters. That defines excellence, and I think that's critical. It has a lesson in life. Going back to the question about AI, I think AI is going to make a huge difference in medicine.
Yeah.
I mean, our experience with Atlas GPT for neurosurgery specifically has demonstrated that the amount of information that can be processed through the AI models is significantly more than the human brain. And although at this time the AI appears to be as an assistant more than a major decision maker, I think very soon, within 5 years, we will see AI models who would be certified in psychiatry and can practice independently as a psychiatrist, especially mental health.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised seeing doctors who are virtual AI models and really will be able to provide a great care, obviously not for procedures, but for consultation. I think we're going to see era of the super intelligence. That means intelligence, AI that is above humans.
Right. And you're referring to like AGI that we hear,
Exactly.
talked about so much in the discourse around
Correct.
AI in terms of, safety and those kind of ethical concerns. It seems like we're on a trajectory that regardless, we are going to hit AGI. It's a matter of who's going to be doing it, how safe it'll be, things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes patients feel like, well, I'm not going to have a doctor. I'm just going to have this model without any supervision. You'll be very surprised how some of these models actually do better than doctors. And in fact, there's numerous studies to demonstrate that they even have more sympathy toward the patients. I think there's going to be a while before surgeons are replaced by AI models. I do believe there's still going to be a very strong role by physicians who don't do surgery as an adjunct to AI models. But AI models will remove the bias that often the physicians have because of how they trained, who was their mentors, what was their experience with their previous last patients. Maybe something happened that had nothing to do with the disease, but we always remember our failures so much that it negatively affects our decision next time, too much. But to have a model that really remains unbiased, uses only verified information and data and research. Obviously, I'm not talking about ChatGPT. I'm talking about, retrieval augmented generated or generation RAG models that are very contextual for specific areas, subspecialties of medicine. They use private data that is vetted through very clear research. I think those kind of very specific models that just don't use any information on internet like ChatGPT does would be extremely instrumental in revolutionizing how we treat patients and how we deal with decision support.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the new RAG architectures that we see with that can be ported onto models that are well known and have that specific training data set is really mind blowing. And especially with Atlas GPT, I mean, it's really incredible to see. You've got a great team that's done a lot of great work with that.
Yeah, I always tell people if you're doing some work and you're not somehow incorporating AI, you're probably not going to be reaching your full potential. AI is going to affect everything we do in the future.
Yeah, it's you again hear in the software world, it's like somebody being a 10x engineer, like to be able to scale the productivity and everything that you have. Tools like this are those 10x tools, even 100x in terms of productivity. Right. It's really mind-boggling if you've never worked with it before.
It's like something. Internet. It's like, imagine the era of internet when the internet and .com era came out and everybody was just, either you were on the internet or you didn't exist. And it's the same thing. AI is a very similar technology. It's the next revolution in our lifetime.
Absolutely. And talking about AI, of course, we, not only is it a revolution in software, we're also seeing just, again, it seems like every 2 months there's a new bit of news about, a new BCI or brain computer interface. Neuralink has implanted in, the first set of human candidates. I mean, young man by the name of Nolan Arbaugh had his device implanted, and he always. I mean, and Nolan, if you're listening, I noticed that you said you're interested in coming on more podcasts. We'd love to have an opportunity to have a conversation with you. But he had his surgery, and again, this is all public information. In Phoenix, Arizona, and now to see the videos of him, playing video games with his mind, it's like something out of a science fiction movie from
I agree.
10 years ago, say, and now it's all rapidly accelerating to incredible potential. But what do you think is kind of, the timeline for, we go from special use cases for folks, that have,
Yes.
spinal cord injuries,
Yes.
and those things, into it becoming a consumer technology? How far away are we from that?
I've had some friends who have discussed this topic with Elon Musk in detail. And I think it's going to be much sooner than everybody thinks.
Yeah.
I think the use of the chips right now for spinal cord injury patients is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Imagine if, just diverting a little bit to another topic, if everybody drives a car that's controlled by AI, there will be no car accidents. And so imagine a world where we have control of our actions, but we have an ability to correct them with a chip in our brain that connects all of us together, and be able to avoid, certain sort of communications or certain things that people do that could potentially place other people at risk. And we have a warning ahead of time to be able to control that. I mean, just imagine the individual who caused so much injury and devastation in Louisiana during a New Year's Eve. Ugh. Imagine if you had a chip and you could really understand what he's thinking an hour before and be able to control that accident. I mean, or event. That would be major. That would be very worthwhile. But will all of us have a chip on our brain at some point? As scary as it sounds, I think it's very likely.
Wow.
It's very likely.
Yeah. I mean, and that is, a big aspect of it. The people that are the naysayers,
Yes.
The argument that they make is that, it creates that, sort of Orwellian dystopian future,
Yes.
that we have all come to be afraid of. But, again, it's a question we kind of have to ask ourselves as a society is, okay, if I can have my brain supercharged by a dime-sized GPU inside my skull, we all have to think about what is the balance between liberty and peace, safety, and prosperity for us all. And I think the sooner that, people in that space take control of that conversation and find, the most appropriate safeguards, then we will have a much better conversation rather than, sort of the nameless, faceless, unelected who make those decisions for us. So I'm glad that you're thinking about these things, and I have so many close colleagues and friends that are contributing so heavily to this field, because we need folks like you helping to weigh in on this.
But remember, there's significant ethical issues around this that have to be resolved first. I don't think anybody would expect that they're going to put on a chip of every American and then control their thoughts. I don't think that's the goal whatsoever. And I think people create that fear to say, oh, we're going to put a chip and control you and take your liberty away. I mean, that's all against the Constitution. Nobody would ever do anything like that. I would look at it as more of a chip that can assist you and help you.
Yeah.
And a way for us to recognize there is issue of risk to others.
Yeah.
Because eventually our Constitution and the role of all of us is to protect each other and make it a better world for each other. So if we have a tool to do that within a framework that protects our freedom, I think that's extremely reasonable, very favorable. But again, I don't think it's the idea that many people talk about. The moment, we're having dinner with friends, they ask me, say, are we all going to have a chip? And I say, most likely, yes. They're all extremely freaked out.
Right.
I don't think the goal is to control you. The goal is how can we make you even a better person and a more productive person at your liberty and freedom to do what you want. And I think that's what we are talking about. I mean, the goal of really AI is to be able to make good decisions using the technology we have, either a self-driving car or robots that helps us in every day to become more productive. I mean, eventually in a few years, the robots are going to be cheaper than 20K a piece. And imagine having a robot where you can communicate with
Right.
extremely easily through your chip without even mouthing words, and they can be able to do that job for you much better than you can. How extremely attractive that world would be. That's what I would look at, rather than saying, okay, somebody's gonna pass these, thoughts through an antenna into my chip and control my actions. I don't think there's any goal or any, in my opinion, any way to do that, or any legal way to do that, and most importantly, any good way to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. No. And I think that's, again, that's what the, fears boil down to, right? With people people are so afraid of the unknown. And for the first time since the internet revolution, and honestly, before that, the telecommunications revolution, the industrial revolution, the gap between these periods of time gets shorter and shorter,
Yes.
To the point that, like you and I were talking about off camera before, OpenAI, they released the full version of their, state-of-the-art model at the beginning of a month ago, and 2 weeks later released, a restrained version that is apparently so good and
Yes.
has so much potential for risk that they're only letting a few people see it. And whether or not that's a marketing technique to kind of drive interest versus the reality of, oh boy, we may have cracked AGI already, now a month into, the new year, by the time, our listeners hear this, it's just, leaves a lot of potential on the table for what the world will be looking like in the next 5 to 10 years. It's
fast.
It's fast. It's so fast.
It is a weekly, almost sort of moving target.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. It's, yeah. I mean, the updates that we see to, models that are, for the consumer that are getting more accurate, with so many topics, it's mind boggling. But before we manage to cross into, cybernetics, everybody's kind of a, a version of RoboCop kind of territory.
Yes.
In the meantime, we are still humans with organic tissue.
Yes.
And, what would be, in your opinion, from folks at home that are minded about trying to optimize themselves, sort of, doing a little bit of, biohacking to improve their cognitive function, especially as across the lifespan, going from young adulthood, and reaching into, early middle age. And as we get older, what do you think is the best thing people can be doing to maintain that cognitive fitness?
Yeah, that's really $100 million question. How can I remain young and cognitively fit and be sharp? I think it all comes down to the basics of sleeping well, eating well, exercising well, and having sort of a great environment that can optimize your happiness. I think stress is one of the biggest challenges that compromises our fitness, cognitive fitness. I think not be able to eat well, irregular eating, and not be able to have a good diet, not be able to sleep on time and wake up on time, not be able to exercise to keep your physical fitness, which so much correlates with your cognitive fitness. I think those are extremely basic concepts that we all know about. I think everybody knows about what I'm talking about, and there's nothing new here. But there's a difference between hearing and listening.
Right.
And I think that's the part that I'm really trying to bring home. Cognitive fitness, part of it is obviously how we're born. There's nothing we can do about that. But be able to remain cognitively fit and get to the next level is really be able to sleep well, a good diet, control the sugar, the fat, the processed food, the microplastics that so many people, and I think it's going to be a much bigger topic coming up soon. And to really keep as much possible, there's no life without stress, a relatively stress-free life, and focus on what your goals in life and write satisfaction on what you have. Because when you're satisfied, you sleep well and you eat well and you exercise well, all those 4 elements together, I think is such an important sort of level of higher octane for your engine to be performing better.
Absolutely. And to that end, it's sort of what is old is new again, and that's the funny thing is we see, folks that, are trying to optimize their health. It's everybody's kind of looking for that little edge. And, but it simply boils down to the basics, like you were just saying, like eat, sleep well, maintain your basic biologic functions and, kind of help reduce that stress level. But, obviously we can say that and it makes sense. And it's the same advice that's been around for a very long time, but often people will try to cope with, other things, any number of forms of vice, drugs, alcohol, many other forms of addiction. But, there is always some concern about like, what are those things doing to our brain health? Can you like touch on that a little bit, especially, especially this time of year, we just had the holidays, alcohol, a lot of folks drink a lot.
Right.
What is, so that people have a better perspective, what are some of the biggest risks that come from, excessive drinking on the brain?
Yeah, we're going to go through that in one of our sessions in detail,
Yeah.
because I think that's an important topic. I think a lot of people ask me when I go to parties or get-togethers, how can I avoid the risk of Alzheimer's disease? How can I live longer? How can I, have a more cognitive fitness longer period of time as I get older? How can I, be a better, a more capable person overall? We all thrive for that. But, just in very simple terms, I don't drink coffee. I think coffee, for example, which obviously is very different than alcohol, gives you a real sudden boost, and you feel energetic, but then suddenly you crash a little bit.
Yeah.
And those mood swings at times can be really sort of interfering with your activities. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Coffee in the morning is very reasonable, but getting into this habit of one coffee and after the other, or Coke after the other, and these sugar sort of binges that we see currently in the younger population especially, is really something that affects the brain and prevents the balance of mood. Yeah. I think the mood balance is something we don't talk about much. Would you rather have a lot of energy and then come down a little bit and have to push yourself up a little bit and then come down? Would you rather control your mood in a very relatively stable manner? Nobody has a perfectly stable mood, but I think the critical equation comes down to supporting as of a stable mood as you can, because that's when your brain can avoid those modulations that you can you have to at times counteract to bring yourself back to balance. Life is a work of opposing forces. And the more you can keep those opposing forces balanced and work at that balance and moderation, I think the more successful you'll be in life. I mean, you can be either a hardcore Democrat or extremely hardcore Republican. I think those are like extremes again, but being a more moderate always seems to be a more long-lasting solution and a successful strategy in life. And if you think that life, everything is an opposing force. Are you religious? You marry a less religious person, and how you balance each other to stay within that moderation is always key.
Yeah.
And I always say, if you're religious, try to marry someone who is a little bit religious than you, so you guys can keep the moderation, rather than both of you flying on one extreme of the spectrum. But going back to the issue of alcohol, I think all those drugs, no matter what they are, marijuana, alcohol, or even more hardcore drugs, the effect they have in causing imbalance in the brain that really carries on long time after they have been cleared from the brain are extremely problematic, have long-term consequences in altering the connections, or we call synapses, between the neurons in the brain, and can really affect you in ways you would never know.
Yeah. And okay, so to that end, and of course we can, definitely our listeners should tune in for more later, because we will touch on we'll try and do some deep dives on these topics. But something that has historically had a reputation for being harmful in terms of what we historically have thought of as a drug. Things like psychedelics, psilocybin mushrooms, things that are we're seeing data that they are synaptogenic, they contribute positively to neuroplasticity. What role do you see those kind of things having? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think that I would rather save that for a session
Sure.
dedicated to it. But I think there are very good independent trials to support their use, and I respect that. But again, it goes back to really reviewing the data, being objective, making sure people who conduct these sort of projects or experiments to prove the efficacy of these drugs don't have financial interest
Sure.
in
That's,
these
yeah.
drugs. If you have a company who's making the drug or which is making the drug, and then they're doing the trial to prove to you that it works, I mean, they're not going to report a trial that's negative or
Right.
inconclusive. So I think these are all reasonable, but they have to be conducted extremely carefully with transparency to make sure that people are making very well-informed decisions.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Cause that's, one of the things, again, the controversy, what started out with cannabis, we saw, it started out as being advocated for medical use. And then, over the last few years, we've seen a huge surge in just legalization straight out. And especially, here in California, is one of the first states to do so. And now we see, in the emergency departments in the hospitals, you see people who are developing conditions from overconsumption. So again, that ties back into the original point of everything in moderation and, with therapeutic goals in mind can be beneficial, but, everybody has to kind of be careful and on the lookout for those kind of things.
That's always the most difficult part, Chad. How do you legalize something, but at the same time keep people accountable?
Right.
And if there was a clear and easy solution to that, this world would be a much better place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. Thank you so much for all of your perspective on all of this, Dr. Cohen. It's been a very informative and enticing episode. And I especially talking about the future and consciousness and
yes.
AI and all these things that are such rich, big topics right now. I'm really looking forward to sitting down with you more to do this, as the weeks go on. So thank you so much for doing this. And
we're gonna have some incredible discussions, Chad, about details of a lot of topics that we've just briefly touched upon. Really, some things that are very important to our listeners and viewers, such as how can you have brain health? How can you live a better life? How can you be a better person in the future? From a perspective of a neurosurgeon and a neurotech entrepreneur who really is trying to immerse himself in this and try to bring some perspective rather objectively about the future of life, future of the brain, and future of tech.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for watching the very first episode of the Atlas and Axis podcast. I've been here with our host, Dr. Aaron Cohen-Gadol, and I'm the co-host. My name is Chad Smith. Thank you and take care.
Thank you. God bless you.